that way when I tape this. Okay, so when I put it on YouTube, it won't have that part with me not making any sound. So I have to put my thoughts starting over out there about the Sussman jury, the Sussman verdict, and how I wasn't surprised um, when I was going over the transcripts of the case on Robert Govella's channel, and I was looking at jury select. We were going through jury selection, and he was reading the transcripts of the whole case. He really read them all out loud. Robert Govella, one of the best guys out there for this sort of thing. So he went over the jury, and the jury was maybe half of the people on the jury were government workers and Democrats. I think all the jurors were Democrats. There was not one juror. I think there might have been one juror on there who was a Republican, but I think they were like a never Trumper type of Republican or something. The rest were all the ones that spoke about their political beliefs all said they were Democrat. So there was 10 jurors. So I should pull up the mind map if I could of Robert Govella's I don't think I'm going to do that though. So I can remember most of it off the top of my head. I'm not going to get too deep into, the actual case, but you had one juror who was. You had three Hillary Clinton donors that donated to Hillary Clinton in 2016 out of the 10. One was an AOC donor. And again, like I said, 5 out of the 10, at least 5 out of the 10 were government workers. And hold on. So, excuse me. So, anyway, 5 out of the 10. So, we had the jury was absolutely ridiculous. And what I want to get to first of all is when I was watching Robert Govella's reading of the transcripts for the jury selection, I was writing in the chat right there that Durham is throwing this trial, throwing it because they didn't challenge, I don't think, any of the jurors. They kind of, cross examined a few and got into their political beliefs, but didn't. I don't know if they struck any. They may have struck a couple, but uh, I could see by the jury right away that it was going to be a big problem. I just thought in the beginning that the evidence would be so overwhelming, which it was, that it would allow it would force a guilty verdict. Except the problem was not only the jurors but also the judge. The judge was, I'm not going to say he was really bad as far as it goes. He did favor the defense. He did favor them quite a bit. Um, so there was that. I mean, even the judge could have struck some of these jurors if they wanted to. They wasn't about to do that. The judge was plainly politically motivated. It was quite obvious. It was quite obvious that he was motivated. He favored the defense. So there was that. But the evidence was overwhelming. The evidence was it's clear, cut, and dry, open and shut case. And so what people really have to understand about this case is not, the political ramifications of it so much as I think this case will have much greater ramifications in the near term, especially in this election. Um, it's a huge black pill for some people. Uh, there's reason to be black pilled right now because, like third century Rome, the United States is experiencing its own third century crisis, and it's kind of ironic. Um, By 268 AD, the Roman Empire was falling apart at the seams. It was split into three different units, basically. Um, there were a lot of assassinations of emperors. There was inflation, and just the whole system started breaking down due to corruption, due to government malfeasance. It's kind of natural for this to happen in a civilization, and it's happening to the United States. In this case in particular, it shows two things: not only how corrupt the government is and how just beyond corrupt they are, but secondly, how I would say a minority in this country, but a large minority, which would be like these kinds of coastal libs, how they no longer care about coming to, an agreement or a compromise with anybody outside of their they use the progressives, of course. They use and abuse the progressives, and the progressives, the base of the progressives, they're downright moronic. What's left of them, of the DC progressives, the AOCs, the squad types. But it showed how we have that small minority that is, they're in it. They're going to do whatever is necessary, whatever they think is necessary to uh, consolidate power and retain that power. So we got that aspect, and really they are the government primarily. 90% of government workers, I would say, are those types of people, or to be fair, 90% of most of that 90% would be people who are just not motivated, apathetic, and they're just there for a paycheck, and they're going to keep their head down, and they want to get their pension. And that's like most of the government workers. It's a really powerful uh, incentive not to dissent too much is that pension. Um, so we got that. We got a bureaucracy that um, is too corrupt to reform. Really, it's too corrupt to reform. And this case is a glaring example of that, of how tainted a jury pool could be, so that you could have no fair case. If it was politically leaning one way, you couldn't have a fair case in DC. If it was politically leaning away from the libs and into conservative or libertarian, because libertarians are not conservative. So if it was to go lean that way, you couldn't get a fair jury. And Robert Barnes makes another good point. It is like having a civil rights case in Birmingham, or like, a black defendant in Birmingham, Alabama in the 60s. It's very similar. And the judge, especially in his jury instructions in this case, the Sussman case, the judge made the jury instructions such that it gave the jurors an out for an acquittal, or it gave the jurors a means for an acquittal. He basically said, well, if you think he has good intent, then you don't. Then it's not a crime, and the jury would have to go not guilty. And then he said he had all of these conditions that favored the defense, a few that maybe were neutral, and all of them gave the jurors a way out, and they only had to use. I don't think that it had to pass all of the points on the jury instructions. So just amazing, but I think we are in a third century crisis, and we have so much in common with not just third century Rome, but the Chinese dynasties at various times. We have so much in common, and it's the inflation that should worry people, because that is always going to create massive problems if not handled. And I don't think our government can handle it. And that's what had a large part to do, a large was a large reason, or a big reason why um, third century Rome fell apart. They started to debase the currency in order to pay the military and the government workers. And the military was the biggest aspect of the government then, the most expensive. But they did have a huge bureaucracy as well for collecting taxes, and there were laws, and there was even police officers and stuff like that. So they had to pay all of them. They debased the currency. That's what our government is doing. And things like the legal system uh, broke down in a lot of places in the Roman Empire, and things became a lot more lawless because the laws became basically illegitimate and ineffective. Once people start seeing, if people see a two-tiered system like that, like a system where a political side is treated unfairly, if that's systemic in a legal system, which defining it systemic, I wouldn't say it needs to be across the entire legal system, but we have large spots of the legal system: California, New York, um, Washington D.C., the Northwest, Chicago, and then little tiny ones in the middle. These are places where the prosecutors are politically motivated. The jurors can be in some of these places, especially a place like Washington, D.C. It's the worst place to have any political trial. They have to start challenging the venue now. And I think this case gives a lot of there's a lot of reasons I think that they can sue. There's a lot of different motions they can file. We'll see if they do that. I doubt it. I think the Durham investigation is over. I think this was a big blow to the credibility of not just the DC's jury, because DC is important because a lot of cases are tried in D.C. by default in the federal court. Most political cases are going to end up being in D.C. because that's where all of their offices are at, etc. So it's just amazing. You can't have a political case in D.C. anymore. So we'll see who's the first to really challenge that. But you can change venue, but they would fight that really hard. It would take a long time. Who knows? It might even go to the Supreme Court because it'll be a unique problem. But the same thing happened in the South in the 60s, and things just got worse as a result, not better. If we remember, that agitated African Americans more, and that's what this is going to do. This is going to really alienate a large portion of the population. For me, I not really, because I already know the United States is declining. It's declining as an empire, and I think as a country, my hope is that it will decentralize. The federal government will simply lose legitimacy. The states, being sovereign entities, can start taking over their own affairs again. Okay? Decentralization. The United States can pull that off because of the basic structure of the country in the first place, and it's really written into our fundamental laws, the Constitution, etc. So, but we are in a third century crisis, and this proves it. I think this is going to be, we'll see. Who knows if it'll take off or not. To me, it's kind of a watershed kind of moment where we start seeing people are starting to say, oh shit, this is really, this country's really getting kind of fucked up. People are going to start thinking that, and it's going to really create a lot of it's the worst possible outcome. And even the government, I think a lot of people within the government, within the legal FBI, DOJ, a lot of them were probably kind of hoping there would be a guilty verdict, because it's just showing just how dysfunctional their own, basically their own departments are. And what tends to happen in history is, the capitals that tend to sort of lose control, the Washington, and they become isolated and kind of city states within themselves as a country falls apart. That's kind of what happens. The money's already at the capital, so they, tend to form their little bubble. That's what happened with Rome. That's what happened with Byzantium. So yeah, so this was kind of major. I think the implications are pretty huge, and that's my rant. I think I am out.